Hey guys, so the final 2022 primary elections were held on the 2nd of August, and there really were some very surprising results and many key takeaways, and a lot of them really do benefit the Democratic Party going forward. In Kansas, we saw that an abortion referendum was voted no upon by people in the very solid red state of Kansas. We also saw that Kari Lake almost lost the Republican primary for governor in Arizona to Karen Taylor Robson. So there are a lot of results that we have to look at today, and of course I'll be going over what they mean for the midterms in November. So starting off with the races in Arizona, on the gubernatorial level, we had two primaries, and on the Democratic side, Katie Hobbs easily won her nomination. She is the current Secretary of State of Arizona and won 72.8% of the votes that have been counted so far. However, on the Republican side, we had a much more competitive race between Kari Lake and Karen Taylor Robson. Basically, this was a spar between the Trump wing of the GOP and the establishment wing of the GOP here in Arizona. Karen Lake won the endorsement of Donald Trump, while Robson was supported by Vice President Mike Pence and even Governor Doug Ducey. So we had two candidates backed by very important figures, but Kari Lake is going to end up on top in this race. When votes first came out for this primary, Lake was actually expected to lose this race because with 60% of votes having been in, Kari Lake was down by a margin of 10%. However, if you look at all of the most recent votes that are coming in, Kari Lake wins a significant majority of them because she has told her voters not to trust mail-in voting. So if you look at the betting markets for this race, Kari Lake currently has a 98% chance at victory. Robson is at 3%, but Robson definitely did do much better than what I expected and what most people expected, because after the first vote dump, we saw that Robson was actually favored to win this race just because of how ahead she was. And so if you look at my prediction for this race, I gave Lake 55% and Robson 42%. As more votes are being counted, we are going to see the numbers become more like this. Lake is still probably going to win a majority, so we may see a double-digit margin in this race, so it will be closer to my initial prediction, but definitely I believe that Karen Taylor Robson is going to do better than what I had previously expected, and basically what everybody had expected. So definitely a very surprising result in this race. Kari Lake much weaker than what we had initially thought, but still, she is going to become the Republican nominee and be the one to officially run against Katie Hobbs for the governorship in Arizona. Now, in Arizona, we also had a major Senate primary on the Republican side, with Blake Masters defeating both Jim Layman and Mark Brnovich. Masters is, of course, the Trump-endorsed candidate in this race, and he's won 39% of votes. With 84% of votes reporting, we're going to see the numbers continue to go up for Masters, for the same reason why we're going to see the numbers go up for Kari Lake as well. So Blake Masters is pretty much going to win the amount of votes that I expected him to win. Looking at my predictions here, I gave Masters 42%, Layman 28%, and 16% for Brnovich, so it is pretty close, but over the next couple of days, we're going to see the numbers go up for Blake Masters. He's going to win over 40%. I think 42 is still a pretty accurate prediction, and Jim Layman and Mark Brnovich's percentages are going to go down slightly. So in the end, Blake Masters is definitely going to be the Republican nominee to challenge Mark Kelly, who won his primary uncontested. And so looking at this race here, it will be very difficult for Blake Masters to win and for the Republicans to flip this seat. Mark Kelly is still positive in his approval rate numbers, and this is 2 years after he first took office. So Mark Kelly is doing a good job in Arizona. At least the voters in the state believe that. And if you look at the polling for this race, I mean, the most recent poll conducted basically since Masters won the nomination shows Mark Kelly up by 5%, and this poll was funded by the American Next PAC. If you look at many of these other polls, both Jim Layman and Mark Brnovich polled stronger against Mark Kelly than Blake Masters. So Blake Masters, if the Republicans wanted to win this race, was not the best nominee. However, he of course did win the nomination and is going to be the one that Republicans are going to have to put up anyways. And so this is probably a big win for Democrats. Democrats should want Blake Masters to be the nominee because he is obviously the one that has the biggest chance of losing to Mark Kelly. And if you look at the 538 forecast currently, Arizona has a 66% chance at going to Kelly. And if you look at our map here, Arizona is one of the 3 major toss-up races that really are going to make a difference this cycle in terms of who controls the upper chamber for the next 2 years. Next up in Kansas, we have two major races here as well to look at. One was the abortion referendum, and the other one was the gubernatorial primary on the Republican side. So Derek Schmidt easily won the GOP primary here with 80% of the vote against Arlen Briggs, and now he is going to be the one to challenge the Democratic governor of Kansas, and of course that is Laura Kelly. Yes, Laura Kelly was elected as a Democrat in 2018 by a margin of 5% over Chris Kobach. Chris Kobach was just way too hardline right-wing for many, even Republicans, to support him, and I mean, this really is pretty surprising considering that Kansas has not voted for a Democrat on the presidential level since all the way back in 1936 in the era of FDR. So if you look at the Kansas results here, Derek Schmidt is a much better candidate than Chris Kobach. Chris Kobach, who is now running for Schmidt's old position, that of course being Attorney General. Schmidt is the current Attorney General of the state, and he really does stand a chance. I believe that Schmidt is going to win by a very narrow margin in this matchup. If you look at the latest polls, Schmidt did lead in the one released in April. However, this poll was funded by the Chris Kobach campaign for Attorney General. Kelly did lead in a previous poll, but this, of course, was funded by the very liberal Emily's PAC. And the only independent poll conducted in September of last year did show Schmidt up by 4. So we do have a very competitive race here in Kansas. I think that as the national environment is becoming more and more favorable to Democrats, Kelly does stand a chance. And according to the 538 forecast, she actually has a 51% chance at victory here. So Democrats are still going to remain competitive in this race, but in my opinion, I do not believe that Laura Kelly is going to win her re-election. She is by far the most vulnerable Democrat on the ballot this November for governor elections, and really, if Democrats are barely even winning in both Nevada and Wisconsin, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to win in a state like Kansas. But we did see a major victory for Democrats if you look at the abortion referendum here in the state. This ballot issue basically asked voters in Kansas whether or not they wanted to remove abortion rights from the Constitution and make it so that their state lawmakers would be able to make new laws restricting rights to abortions for the people of their state. And so 58.8% of voters voted no, and just 41.2% voted in favor of amending the Constitution. Now, looking at the state of Kansas and its results in the last couple of presidential elections, in 2020, Trump won Kansas by 14.7%. In 2016, it was a margin of 20%. And a state like this voted no on an abortion referendum. I mean, this really just goes to show you how beneficial the Roe v. Wade issue is going to be for Democrats. It really is energizing voters. I mean, 900,000 people turned out for this race. In the 2020 presidential election, we saw 1.1 million votes. And so really that is just how energizing an issue like abortion can be. And I mean, this is in the state of Kansas, and this really just shows you just how unpopular many pro-life opinions are, and that Democrats really are going to see a major boost in the numbers in the next couple of months as a result of abortion being a frontline issue for this year's midterms. Next up, in Michigan, we only had one competitive race, and this was the Republican gubernatorial primary, in which Tudor Dixon defeated Kevin Rinke, Garrett Soldano, and Ryan Kelly. Basically, the race went exactly as I had predicted. Looking at my prediction, I gave Dixon 44%, Rinke 19%, Soldano 17%, and Ryan Kelly 14%. And basically, exactly this has happened, although you do have to add or remove a couple of percentage points for each of these candidates. And so, of course, this does mean that Tudor Dixon is now going to be officially the Republican nominee to challenge Gretchen Whitmer. Whitmer was, of course, elected in 2018 by a 9.6% margin against Bill Schuette, so she did do very well 4 years ago, and this time it looks like she is on track to winning by a double-digit margin. If you look at all of the most recent polls, Whitmer is up by 10%, 37%, and 19%. She is positively approved of in the Wolverine state, and she's at 50% in all three of these polls. Now, the issue of abortion is also going to be a major problem for the Dixon campaign. She has very conservative views on the matter, and honestly, if she's elected, she would have the power to repeal abortion rights for the people of Michigan, as she does have support from the GOP-controlled legislature. So Gretchen Whitmer is going to receive a lot of support and momentum simply from the fact that many independents and Democrats fear that they're going to lose their abortion rights if Dixon is elected. So if you look at the 538 forecast for this race, Democrats currently have a 95% 25% chance at victory. Michigan is a solid Democratic state according to 538, and Tudor Dixon currently is expected to lose by a double-digit margin. So things here are definitely not going well for the GOP in Michigan. And right now, looking at the forecast that we also have in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, Democrats are expected to win the upper Midwest by a very solid margin, just like they did in 2018, with Tom Wolf being reelected by 17%, Whitmer winning by 9.6%. Wisconsin, we saw a flip for Tony Evers here, winning by 1.1% against Scott Walker, who is running for a third term in office. And of course, Tim Walz won by double-digit margin in Minnesota. So right now, things are going very well for Democrats in the upper Midwest, and Michigan is just one example of this. With Tudor Dixon as the Republican nominee, Democrats are probably going to win this race pretty easily. In Missouri, we had competitive primary races on both sides for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Roy Blunt. Eric Schmidt, of course, won the Republican nomination with 46% of the vote, and Vicky Hartzler and Eric Grimes came in second and third. Pretty similar to my prediction. I gave Schmidt 40%, Hartzler 25%, and Grimes 21%, so Schmidt did do slightly better than what I had thought. And in this race, Donald Trump endorsed an Eric, not citing whether that was going to be Schmidt or Grimes, but Eric Schmidt winning is a win for the GOP. If Grimes won this nomination, he might have actually lost this race. Roy Blunt came very close to losing in 2018, only defeating Jason Kander by 2.8%. And on the same ballot on the presidential level in 2016, Donald Trump won Missouri by a solid margin. So after Schmidt wins this nomination, he's going to become the next U.S. Senator from Missouri. I mean, just look at the 538 forecast. They have Missouri as a solid Democratic state, with Schmidt having a 98% chance at victory. In the Democratic race, though, Trudy Busch Valentine won by a pretty small margin. I mean, this race was a lot more competitive than what we had previously thought. I had it being a margin of 55-25 in favor of Valentine, but she only won by a margin of 5% against Lucas Coons. And so this was a pretty disappointing race for her campaign. And so now that she's won the nomination, although very slightly, she is going to lose the eventual general election to Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt has been doing pretty well in the polls, but if Grimes won the nomination for the GOP, I mean, this race would only be a lean Republican state, maybe likely, but Eric Grimes would still be in a very competitive race against Valentine. The polls basically showed them tied over the last couple of weeks, but Eric Schmidt does have a much more commanding lead, so the GOP definitely did make a good decision by not going with their former governor. And if you look at the 538 forecast now that Schmidt has won the nomination and Valentine for the Democrats, Eric Schmidt has a 98% chance at holding on to this seat after Roy Blunt leaves office, and currently he is expected, of course, to win by a very solid margin. So Missouri is probably going to be a very solid state for the GOP, as of course Eric Schmidt is the best candidate that they could have chosen. And finally, in Washington, Patty Murray won her blanket primary. Basically, the top two candidates in this primary of any party were to advance to the general election in November. And of course, these two candidates are going to be Patty Murray and Tiffany Smiley. Many Republicans have touted Smiley as being potentially a very good candidate, but I mean, she did not even win a third of the votes here. And Patty Murray already won a majority. So at this point, she's pretty much guaranteed to win the race in November. And even if she does not win by over 15%, realistically, it is not going to matter at all. She is still going to be reelected, basically getting all her support from the western region of the state. And if you do look at the most recent polls for this race, Patty Murray has led by very solid margins, and according to the 538 forecast, Democrats currently have a 96% chance at holding on to the seat, with Patty Murray winning her 6th term in office. So the final primary races of the 2022 election cycle are going to be a mixed bag for a lot of people, but overall Democrats are going to benefit from many of these results, especially in Arizona and Michigan. The GOP's candidates for governor here really are not the best, and if you look at many of the Senate elections, I mean, the GOP has not chosen very good candidates with Blake Masters. Eric Schmidt is a better one though, and the big win for Democrats here was the abortion referendum. Even in Kansas, it failed by an overwhelming margin, so Democrats did definitely have a lot to win, and they did win in a lot of these races. And of course, the Democratic nominees were easily renominated, and many of these nominees, especially Mark Kelly in Arizona, are probably not going to face two competitive races just because of who the GOP has chosen to run on their side. And of course, this comes as for the very first time since last year, Democrats and Republicans are now tied on the generic ballot. Basically, the Republican Party has lost entirely the lead that they had nationwide over Democrats generically. And so this means that we are set for a very competitive midterm election in November, with both parties having a very good chance in many of the races that we have on these maps here. And so these primary races were definitely very interesting to look at, and they provide a lot of insight for the election that we're going to have in just 3 months.